Welcome, everyone. And thank you for joining us this evening for our celebration of the dazzling group of authors and books spotlighted in the new Nonfiction 2024 feature of our September-October magazine issue, which includes some of the year's most poignant, meditative, and experimental memoirs, essay collections, and memoirs and essays. As always, my name is India Lena González, and I'm the features editor of Poets and Writers magazine. Tonight's event will include readings from our debut nonfiction authors, which will be followed by a conversation about their book journeys thus far. Our annual new nonfiction feature, which is now in its seventh year running, highlights 5 excellent debut books, and in this series, we ask our chosen authors to write personal essays sharing stories about the creation of their debuts, taking our readers on their respective literary and publication journeys. Since only the print issue includes these beautifully written and inspiring essays that each author wrote, we will drop a link in the chat to our magazine subscription page for those of you who don't already receive our publication every other month and would like to. And just as a point of reference, this is our lovely September-October issue with Garth Greenwell on the cover. And we're also going to include a link to the online version of this feature, which includes only excerpts from the 5 books alongside audio clips. Yeah? So lots of wonderful content across online and in print for these 5 authors. Some housekeeping notes to keep in mind before we move forward. We kindly ask that our audience members remain muted throughout the entirety of the event so we can fully enjoy the authors without any disruption or background noise. Additionally, please feel free to utilize the chat feature and share any questions you may have for the writers so we can incorporate as many of them as possible at the end when we get to the Q&A. Now, this evening, we have the very real pleasure of hearing from and sharing virtual space with David Martinez, author of Bones Worth Breaking, published by MCD, Wei Tchou, author of Little Seed, published by A Strange Object, Zara Chowdhary, author of The Lucky Ones, published by Crown, Lydia Paar, author of The Exit is the Entrance, Essays on Escape, published by University of Georgia Press, and Neesha Powell-Ingabire, author of Come By Here, a memoir and essays from Georgia's Geechee coast, published by Hub City Press. I am so thrilled to have all 5 of you joining us tonight, and I want to congratulate you all again on the publication of your debuts, which tell the tales of brotherly love in the literal and metaphoric wounds that shape us, family lore, ferns, and selfhood. There we are, there's Neesha. We also have tales of a childhood spent surrounded by anti-Muslim violence and forging one's own sense of belonging on the page, physical and emotional landscapes that lead to transformations, and the kinfolk places and traditions that carry within us and that we carry in turn. So for our audience, we have also created a bookshop page, including the titles of all of tonight's authors. Very nice, right? Should you feel moved to purchase their works and support independent booksellers in the process. And that will be shared in the chat as well. So now we're going to get to the good stuff and we're going to get to the reading. So we're going to kick things off with a reading from David Martinez, who earned his MFA from UC Riverside Palm Desert and previously taught English and creative writing at Glendale Community College in Arizona. He is a dual citizen of the United States and Brazil and has lived all over both countries as well as in Puerto Rico. His work has appeared in the Coachella Review, the Los Angeles Review of Books, Broken Pencil, and Automata Review. He lives in Glendale, Arizona, and I want to go ahead and say, welcome, David.
Thank you very much. Thanks. So I'll read it, just a couple really brief things. This one is just from a blip where when my little brother and I stole cigarettes from a grocery store. So my plan was we could grab this old fanny pack my dad had in the closet. I'd put it on and we'd ride our bikes to the local grocery store, which at the time kept their cigarettes up front by the register together with the gum and candies. We were going to buy something and take it to the line where I would open the National Enquirer to cover Mike while he grabbed a couple packs of Marlboro Reds and stuffed them into the fanny pack. Mike. And that was the funniest shit. Like, we got all scared at the last minute and yelled, "Hey, I'll meet you outside," so everyone could hear us, and then walked out the doors at the same time just to meet up right in front of the store. And no one paid any attention. I'm laughing or Mike's laughing. At this point in the recording, it's hard to tell which. By this point, we're both loud. We're both traveling through our stories with a velocity that binds through sheer force. Mike, no, man, no one saw shit. We thought like everyone would be watching us and the cameras would be on us, but no one was ever going to pay attention to these like two random kids. And so I'll go from there to like a little vignette that I have here, which is Ghost Like Satin. Mike was alive when I began writing this book. It was supposed to be about the two of us, the fucked up adventures, the Martinez bros. So I asked him about stories, wanting to get down everything he wanted and needed to contribute. It was so important to me to hear from him what he wanted to say. It was hard for him to write toward the end. While in prison, he had his phone rights taken away after getting in trouble a couple of times. They're all issued tablets, and the one Mike wrote with was low quality and hard to type on, so I would ask specific questions and see what he was able to answer. When I asked about our late nights in Puerto Rico as children, he wrote, and yeah, dude, of course I remember that, dude, but staying up hanging out always reminds me of the hurricane, and everyone being up all night, drinking and smoking. Yeah, good times. LOL. Let me know if you're still up, dude. Love you, Mike. It was late, but I was still up. For him, I would always try to stay up. Though that didn't always happen. While we had to pay for each email we sent, it was quicker than letters. He liked when we were able to talk to each other at the same time. It's like we're texting, he would say, and that would break my heart. I tried to stay awake, but the messages would get blocked by guards sometimes or would just take too long to come, and it was expensive. Our texting conversations never lasted long, even if we did send at least one short message a day to one another. I had to take Mike's scant comments and paint the pictures to match his words myself. The hurricane, staying up all night. Nights in Puerto Rico were warm and salty. We think of them in fragments, wandering in the dark through the smell of tropical plants and our neighbor's laundry detergent. Nights in the park, surrounded by drunk girls and their boyfriends, our friends and girlfriends, the people we loved, stumbling through the basketball court and bleachers. The storm had torn the metal roof off those bleachers and sent it bouncing down the street like a crumpled ball of tinfoil. After the hurricane, the air stopped. We would leave our parents sleeping and sit out in the 4 a.m. stillness. Saha would rest her back on my folded legs, her spine eating into my knee. Angel did magic tricks, guessing the cards we'd picked each time while the next door neighbor stared at him in love. Mike Pena told stories about his old buddies killed off in gang wars. The girls across the street shined flashlights in our faces and giggled if we walked too close to their house. I saw a ghost once, Jasmine said. She'd broken up with me, but she still hung around, her hair sometimes orange, sometimes blue. She often brought a girlfriend with her, but never another boyfriend. Mike gave a half chuckle. He couldn't tell if she was joking. Neither could I. It didn't matter. We were all buzzed and in love with the peaceful isolation of living in the middle of the night with no electricity at a time and place in which no disaster mattered. We were kids. Jasmine and Saha were 15, Mike Pena and I about 14. Mike was 11, always the youngest among us. Angel was maybe 17, and the neighbor girl who was in love with him about 15. We were in front of Saha's house or in the park with other friends whose names and faces I no longer remember, though I dream of them sometimes. Jasmine pushed her orange hair out of her face and looked at the dark across the street, serious. I did, she said. It hung there in the air for a while. I got a good look. It wasn't like one of those eye trick things. Mike and I stared at her, and in this memory, he's in more of a shadow than the rest of us. He scratched his head. Oh. I followed her gaze into the dark. It looked like my grandma, she said, but like all in white, like white satin. And in the dark, I thought I saw a wisp of light, blurred, almost real. Like this memory is a blurred wisp. Like the deepest pull in my chest when I remember Mike, but I can't see him as well as I used to. There's not a single person in that group I'm still in contact with. For all I know, I'm the only one left with these images in my head, these blips I'm afraid to lose. How much is already lost? The moments in which we sat quiet, listening to the night air, to the coquilles, to the sound of card tricks and stories about ghosts. When Mike died, everything he knew that I didn't was lost. And when we're both gone, who will still see us, believe we existed?
Mhm. Wow. Thank you so much, David. That was a great way to start off the reading, I feel. So, so good. Wow. All right. Our second author is Wei Tchou. Wei's essays and reporting can be found in The New Yorker, The New York Times, The Paris Review, and The Oxford American, among other publications. She likes to write about food, nature, and the complications of identity. Wei is the recipient of a McDowell Fellowship and has an MFA from Hunter College. She lives in New York City, where she is tending a lemon tree. The floor is yours, Wei.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. I'm gonna read I'm gonna read from the back half of my book. Um, so this section begins when I'm at a writing retreat actually in upstate New York. In the woods around Austerlitz, I started to conceive of my body differently. This new conception was based on how it felt to be inside my body. Hard to believe now, but it hadn't previously occurred to me to locate the shape of myself from the inside. I felt the texture of pebbles or soft earth underfoot, for the way my legs would burn, then rest and burn, tall and trim, but forced through the column of my body. My throat always stung in the first half hour, but then eventually I'd warm up and chase my thoughts and feelings in rhythm with the trail, walking outside and walking inside. I was so overwhelmed by the experience of being in the woods, I didn't see any ferns at first. Nature was its own cosmos. I was pummeled by this realization. It will always be wildly and ecstatically indifferent to my insistence on plucking out a single organism and memorizing its every facet. The green of summer slipping into ochre, the tangle of loam and brush underfoot, tiny insects weaving their way around sprays of flowers hanging from tree branches. There's no way to make a story about it. But eventually, the ferns found me, true ferns by the trail or further in. I'd carefully pick my way through, examine one, find another nearby. They taught me their patterns and habitats. Soon, I was able to notice them in even my periphery. Eventually, I began collecting fern fronds. In my writing studio, I laid them on the long table beneath a large window that stamped a rectangle of hard light onto the chipped oak planks of the floor. I sat down to identify the ferns, choosing a frond and opening my guide. It was easy to tell that its leaves were pinnatifid, that its rachis was bare, but it was impossible for me to compare its source with the images in my field guide and say whether it was round or kidney-shaped or even whether the papery indusium was attached. Looking at the plant in front of me was like encountering a different creature entirely from the one I'd been studying so diligently in the field guide. The sori were mounded like roe, the buttons of them irregularly shaped. It was the real thing, and I was distraught, realizing I was encountering ferns for the first time. There was nothing to do but keep encouraging myself to see. After a few days, my desk was littered with a dozen dry and crumpled blades that I had not managed to name, no matter how many trips I took through my field guide. My hands felt hot as I swept them into the garbage basket near my desk. I came to Austerlitz believing it would be simple, with all the language I had acquired, to point to a plant like fern and call it by its name. I felt ashamed to have thought I could simply arrive. What is this life that I'm able to skim its surface and weave story upon story above what is real? How is it that stories can feel so true, so as to be impossible to distinguish from reality, from the feeling of the air on skin, the smell of wet earth, the emotions following in real time, one after the other? All I'd wanted to do was come to know life, to come to know ferns, but the glade in my mind shattered when I encountered them as they were. Thank you, guys.
So much, Wei. That was beautiful. All right. Following Wei is Zara Chowdhary, a multi-hyphenate writer, producer, and educator from Chennai, India. She now lives in Madison, Wisconsin, and has an MFA in creative writing and environment from Iowa State University and an MA in writing for performance from the University of Leeds. She has taught courses in Hindi and South Asian cultures, protest poetry, and creative nonfiction. Welcome, Zara.
Thank you, India, and thank you all for being here and for listening to us. I'm going to read from the epilogue of my book. This is a portion of the book that I really had to stand my ground to keep. So I love putting it out into the world. My book is called The Lucky Ones. When Farida Abdul Qadir Khalifa, one of the witnesses to and survivors of the massacre in 2002, is questioned in court about her ability to identify members of the mob in fading daylight, she says, उजाले में खड़ा इंसान देख नहीं सकता, जो अंधेरे में खड़ा है उसको दिख जाता है सब. A person standing in broad daylight is often blinded. It's when you're standing in the dark that you really begin to see. I've often asked myself if perhaps it was the unbelonging within my own home that so attuned my moral compass to authoritarian nation states, joint families, patriarchy, and other systems that offer you belonging or security, but in turn demand your unquestioning loyalty, your total acquiescence. I want to believe the darkness of 2002 sharpened the clarity with which I can discern the oppressor from the oppressed, and it has emboldened my refusal to live a life as either. Amma would often get complimented by relatives who simply saw two shy young girls and didn't realize how scared and closed off our lives were. You've done a fantastic job with with these girls, Ruxana, they would blindly say. They have such good tarbiyat. These people thought they were praising an oppressed housewife for the good upbringing of her daughters, who would someday also make oppressed housewives. But you see, tarbiyat doesn't really mean an upbringing. In Islam, it means a cultivated ethic, a code of conduct from where one begins, an uprising. Like the Battle of Badr, the first war the Muslims fought, when Islam was not yet a major global religion, but simply a band of 300 rebels in the desert. The Muslims were fighting the Quraysh, the Prophet's own tribe, the merchant class of Mecca who had come to hate him for disrupting their capitalist society with talk of social justice. The Quraysh had an army 1,000 strong, yet the Muslims won. When prisoners of war were taken, the code dictated that their dignity be maintained. The Prophet's companions clothed the half-naked prisoners in shirts off their own backs. In a world defined by land, clan, tribe, Islam created a political unit out of faith, an agreement to follow the law despite our tribal affiliations, a clear rejection of the human impulse to take sides only with our own kind. The Prophet insisted we always reflect within first. That's where the real jihad, the real contestation must start, with one's own. Amal, my half Yemeni building friend, half jokingly once told me when we were kids that ultimately all Muslims should aim to live in Islamic countries like Saudi Arabia or Yemen. It was the only way we could have dignity and belonging, close to the home of our Prophet, close to Mecca, the center of our faith. I refused this vehemently as a child, even when I understood nothing of geopolitics. My whole body refuses this vehemently even today, 2 decades later. The Islam of an Indian Muslim is one of good tarbiyat. We have lived for centuries in this nation as a minority, across the ocean from Mecca, across the border from Pakistan, maintaining our dignity. My faith is not anchored by geography, just as my belonging to my father is not measured by my distance from his grave. In the chapter Al-Rahman, Allah asks children like me, فَبِيَعِي عَلَىٰ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ. Which favors of your God will you deny? I cannot deny. Our idea of India and being Indian Muslims, as we learned it through Dada, Papa, Puppu, Amma, through blood, land, and spirit ancestors, through teachers who taught us and strangers who saved us, gave us a code to live by, the pursuit of justice at all costs. My home is in this memory I hold of India, of who we once were, and my uprising is to keep this story writ into history, no matter how much erasure stamps over it. Some days when it feels like my motherland is forsaking me, telling me I'm not hers, she is not mine, and my soul wants to cry like an orphaned child, I remind myself that my belonging was bequeathed to me by the best of mothers, my Amma. She lost a child, a chance at love, a life of freedom, but she chose Misbah and me to empty herself into. We own everything that is great and beautiful and redeemable about our country. Its humor, its refuge, its magnanimity, its humility, its ability to bend and absorb every shard of grief thrown its way, and from it to grow flowers, to make life. Thank you.
That was mesmerizing. I'm so glad you stood your ground for that. We all wanted that passage. That was beautiful. Wow. All right. Our fourth reader for this evening is Lydia Paar, an essayist and fiction writer. Lydia's essay Erasure was of notable mention in the 2022 Best American Essays collection and was the 2020 winner of North American Review's Terry Tempest Williams Creative Nonfiction Prize. An MFA recipient from Washington University and an MA recipient from Northern Arizona University, Lydia is also a former recipient of a Frederick and Francis Summer Foundation Fellowship and of a Malay Arts Residency. Take it away, Lydia.
Thank you so much, and thank you to everybody here for coming. Can you hear me okay? assuming. Yeah, okay, awesome. I'm just going to read a little bit from sort of near the beginning of the book, which is where it sort of begins when I'm 14 years old. Maybe if I have a job, I think to myself, I'll get to go buy a car and then some freedom. I could drive to the beach, or at least do my homework at a coffee shop. But who will hire a 14-year-old? Subway will, says my school friend Sarah. I interview with Michelle, who smokes a cigarette while reading my handwritten application. She's irreverent and homely and nice, and she hires me on the spot. Now we are all on shift together. Me, Sarah, and her two public school pals who become my pals too. Our polo shirts slightly stained, our visors straight. Sandwich artist is what the visor says across the front, but mine should say escape artist, for this new job is how I will escape being broke. As the line wraps around the deli's counter seating, we form a fireman's brigade for sandwiches. Sarah slices bread, Becky slaps down meat and cheese, Julie counts 2 tomato slices, 4 pickles, and 6 olives per 6-inch, double for a foot long. I stuff in the lettuce, squirt sauces, wrap and bag the sub, then give it to the cashier, usually a manager. In between rushes, we'll restock. Oops, I cringe, arriving at the back prep counter in the aftermath of the last mid-lunch rush. The meat's been left out and now it's sweating. Simon, my manager, motions me towards him at the walk-in. Here, and hands me a green pepper, hollowed out to make a makeshift pipe. Because I'm 14, I've not yet learned that getting stoned and trying to do anything other than eat is futile. So it takes me longer after I leave the frost of the giant fluorescent lit fridge to rewrap my meat, mop the floor. As I glob mayonnaise into a dinged metal bowl of partially thawed faux crab mix, a wayward, noisy customer spies me and asks, "Is there dolphin meat in there?" "Nope," I retort. The tender pink crab is clearly pictured on the menu board above. No dolphin. But then I realize who knows what gets into hasty fishing nets along the way. Who will dare to care? Not us for $5.50 an hour. That $5.50 will barely buy my pack of Camels, which I will talk my mom's biker boyfriend into purchasing post-work before it occurs to him to hog our family's jewelry for his eventual backslide into drugs. I go on to squish the fish and mayo together until it looks blended, then plop it all in a big plastic tub. I drop the tub into the front food line and step outside through the side door to see the sun setting softly over the adjacent shopping center parking lot. Then I see them, my well-moneyed friends, the ones from Central Catholic, from Eastmoreland, the ones who don't work. They find it fun that I work at Subway, though, because I get 1 free sandwich per shift, and they can try to relieve me of mine. Sometimes I give in, making their orders when none of the other bosses are around, but I like my own sandwiches. I'm hungry in general, and with a lightning metabolism. Anorexia, they whisper, but no. I crave BLTs, but also a sense of adventure alongside my chicken bacon ranches, meatball marinaras, and mirages of adulthood soon to come and release me from my boring daily toils here in teenagehood. I consume my sandwiches and my visions, then smoke my cigarettes, a new habit I've adopted after boss Michelle, and it will be years before I've come to understand I'm the only worker who takes the legally allotted 15-minute breaks, 1 per 4 hours, because I smoke, and if I don't, I get bitchy. So anyway, I step outside to smoke and I talk with the Eastmoreland kids. They're having dinner soon, they tell me. Then maybe they'll try to shoulder tap some beer. I should join them. Though sometimes annoying, these particular kids can be fun in a risky kind of way. The last time we all hung out, it was 6 or 7 of us. We walked to Reed College campus, empty during spring break, to an old student rec hall, and pushed each other over the wooden balcony, there out of shopping carts, falling 15 or so feet onto a stack of piled up old couch cushions. I agree to join them. Across the parking lot at Wong's Garden, after my shift, the appetizers arrive. The small group of us are so obnoxious, mainly the boys, that a man at the next table over, middle-aged and on a date with a shy-seeming woman in a coral lipstick and a floral dress, asks us twice to quiet down. We're rude with our cursing. Backtalk ensues. I don't recall who told who to fuck off first, but I have my guess. The richest boy from Eastmoreland. I think it was the poor white trash boy of the group, Hal by proxy, who first invited him out to the parking lot to clear it all up. I don't recall who threw the first punch, man or boy, but what happened next etches irrevocably into my mind. My so-called friends circling the older man, then a flurry of punches till he falls down. I yell for them to stop, but they're well past that. When I storm off crying, the man's sandy blonde head and work boots curl together like a shrimp as he tries to fend off their feet coming in straight to his ribs. I am sure there is something more I should have done, but that's what I did. On the subway steps again, lighting a shaky cigarette, I take out my flip phone to dial 911 on my friends. But then Vic, the other girl in the group, comes and asks why I left. The ruckus is over now. The overworked restaurant owner broke it up. I try to explain how disgusted I am, how upset. I'm gulping for air as I gesture. Well, she says, it's over now anyway. The boys got kicked out and they're going to one of their houses to hang. The richest boy lives the closest, the boy I remember baiting the man. Are you coming? Are you kidding? I suck down my smoke madly as she shrugs and walks back to join them. I don't know this then, but in the future, more than once, again, I'll find myself wondering how people I know, people I'm close to, can tolerate cruelty in certain unexpected circumstances. The realization will disturb me each time it happens, and each time it happens, I will lose a little faith in human goodness. I'm still mad as I stub out my cigarette. I think I'll stop there, actually, on a happy note.
Yeah. Oh, I love how Subway opens up into this bigger understanding of humanity and how cruel we can be. So lovely. All right. Our final reader this evening is Neesha Powell-Ingabire. Neesha is a coastal Georgia born and raised movement journalist, essayist, and community and cultural organizer living in Atlanta, also known as occupied Muskogee Territory. They report on the justice movements of the Black, queer, and trans communities to which they belong and write essays to recover their own history and the histories of their ancestors and ancestral homes. Neesha recently graduated with an MFA in creative writing from Georgia College. Welcome, Neesha.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This is very surreal and such an honor. I'll be reading from my debut book, Come By Here, a memoir and essays from Georgia's Geechee coast. And I'll be reading from the final chapter, Dancing in the Wind. Gazing out the car window, I observed the contrast between the carefree children on the school playground and the cemetery parallel to it, where a few dozen somber people gathered to bid farewell to Aunt Nettie. The kids must have been used to the sight of a funeral procession, but that didn't stop them from staring at the cop car, leading Aunt Nettie's body to its final resting place, and the hearse and two limos behind it. Aunt Nettie was going home, her home. She was returning to Jesus, who she praised her entire life in choir stands and liturgical dances. She posted a Bible verse on Facebook daily, all the way up until she got admitted to the hospital for severe COVID-19 symptoms around Thanksgiving. I only talked to her once after that, as she breathed with the help of a ventilator. The good Lord don't make no mistakes, she assured me. She died a month later on Christmas Day. Her body was transported from Grand Blanc, Michigan, to her childhood home, Darien, Georgia, where she was to be buried next to her mother and father, across from Todd Grant Elementary School, once a K through 12 segregated school for local Black children, from where she and several of my other relatives graduated. Dressed in gray from head to toe, I sat in the back of the second limo, wedged between my oldest sister, Renee, and my wife, JoJo, and behind a cousin I hadn't seen in years, and her husband, a man wearing a clerical collar who I just met for the first time. At the cemetery, we waited for the chauffeur to let us out, but ended up letting ourselves out once it took him too long. I adjusted my N95 mask and the sunglasses my sister Nicole insisted I wear. It's our thing, she had said. There was plenty of sun to block out, despite the weather being in the 50s, unseasonably cold for coastal Georgia in January. I took my place at the back of a short line with my sisters and JoJo to view Aunt Nettie's body lying in a white casket under a canopy tent. Once we got to the front, Nicole linked arms with me to steady herself, her stilettos sinking into the red earth. Our mother, not in attendance because she was taking care of another ailing aunt, had seen pictures from Aunt Nettie's wake the day before. She doesn't look like herself, she lamented over the phone. I couldn't make an accurate assessment given I hadn't seen my great aunt in person in almost a decade. She wore a matronly black wig in her casket. I preferred the fun gray curls she sported in her most recent Facebook photos. At least she looked peaceful. I wanted to touch her, but I refrained from doing so. Nobody else was touching her, and I stupidly wondered if I could catch COVID-19 from her corpse. Silently, I asked Aunt Nettie for forgiveness. I'm not like her. I don't know what I believe happens to our souls after we die. I don't know if our spirits stick beside the people who loved us when we were alive. I like to think my ancestors are protecting me, which is why I showcase their photos on an altar. But I'm honestly not sure if there's an afterlife at all. Wherever Aunt Nettie was, I hoped she could hear my silent plea. She had wanted to come to Atlanta for Thanksgiving. I need to see my family, she wrote to me on Facebook. I didn't offer her a bedroom at my place because JoJo and I were in the middle of a stressful move. My siblings didn't have room nor capacity to host her either. So she planned to stay at a hotel, but she never made it down south. She landed in the hospital with COVID-19 instead. The guilt still eats away at me. Aunt Nettie had just entered her 70s. I should have made more of an effort to see her. The godmother who stayed up all night to sew my lace-adorned christening gown, slip, bonnet, and booties. The baby sister of my beloved grandmother. I should have asked to read her work from the bachelor's in English and creative writing program she completed well into her golden years. I should have let her know I still cared. A few years prior, I tried to visit Aunt Nettie when I attended a conference in Detroit about an hour away from her home, but she declined, saying she was busy with chores, church, and work. I wrote her off then because of my fragile ego. She doesn't want to see me because I'm queer, I decided. I made it so her post didn't show up on my Facebook news feed. I found her constant prayers and Bible quotes to be excessive. I couldn't shake the hurt of her not dropping everything to visit with me in Michigan, so I looked at them as hypocritical. She loved God, Jesus, and the Holy Ghost enough to center them in her life, I thought to myself, but she didn't love me enough to fit me into her busy schedule. I forgot about the good times we shared. They came flooding back as soon as I received the news of her death on Christmas morning. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Neesha. I'm totally going to parrot what someone said in the chat that there's like the amount of talent between the five of you is staggering. So thank you all for reading and sharing your voices with us. That was such a treat. Now, as all the authors join me back on screen, we're going to head into the Q&A portion, which I'm equally as excited for. And a reminder for the audience, if anyone has a question for one or all of the authors, please feel free to share it in the chat, and I will try my absolute best to incorporate as many of your questions as possible. Lovely. Now that we're all on, I'll get started, and I would love to begin by asking all of you to discuss the impetus behind each of your books. And specifically in your essay in the print issue, David, you mentioned the event, kind of the car accident that spurred you to start writing your memoir. So I'd love to hear more about that process for you, and then for all of you, if there was a specific watershed event or a light bulb moment that kind of set you on your path to writing your book, or if it was a gradual process where you realized at the end, oh, I think I just wrote a memoir or a book.
Yeah. All right. So I had written a novel for my MFA, and I had, sent it out to a bunch of agents, and I hadn't been hearing a whole lot back. And I was in Palm Springs in California, and I was walking across the street, and I was hit by a car. I was okay physically, but I was really mad that I was hit by the car, and I writing this essay like all pissed off that I was hit. But I can't write very well from anger, and it wasn't working. And I saw like this little scar that I have on my hand, and so I started writing about, that, and then this scar that I have on my leg and another one on my back. And it just kind of started snowballing from there. And until it turned into this book, this one. And I was writing it, and so my little brother and I were the best friends growing up. He was 3 years younger than me, and we were writing it. We grew up with the same problems, came up with the same addictions, same everything through the opioid epidemic, and and he ended up going to prison, and I ended up teaching and doing this and writing. But I would talk to him every day. And so every day we would talk, and I'd write down more stories, and we'd get stuff together. And then I sent the manuscript out to agents thinking that it was done. And the day that I sent it out, he died. So he died of septic shock during the time of COVID. Probably he got COVID, which turned into pneumonia, which turned into sepsis. And so I withdrew the manuscript from all the agents, and I rewrote the book. And that's kind of the quick version of the story as to how it like started. It was about 5 years from the time that I started writing it until MCD bought it.
Thank you.
I can go next. I came to the US in 2017 and got into an MFA program at Iowa State University. I think I see Kenny in the chat here. Hey, Kenny. And I was very clear that I was going to write fiction. That had been my whole 20s of writing for film and advertising. It was always writing other people's stories and writing things that were commissioned. And in many ways, I was quite aware that it meant that I was escaping writing about myself. And I was very happy to do that. But in 2014, this Hindu supremacist, right-wing government gets elected in India and then when I come to the US, it feels like things are getting worse and worse on the ground. And I was away at a short writing residency, and I ended up in a poetry workshop, which really is the strangest thing because poetry for me is something I write and hide under the mattress. It is not a thing I show to the world. And it's because it comes really from the gut. It is not a thing that I think comes from any big cerebral artistic talent for me. And I wrote what was essentially a direct address to the men who troubled my father at work. My father was a government servant, a public servant in India, and a Muslim man who was in service for 21 years and harassed and discriminated against throughout those years. And as I started to write it, and I wrote about the fact that he would come home and what he experienced at work and the sort of discrimination that decimated his sense of being a man at work, would come home and turn into this fire that was directed at his wife and children. It really appeared to me that what I was really telling was a story of slow trickling violence that sort of percolated from the political down into the personal. And so as I looked at the world outside and the sort of, raging violence against Muslims again in India, it was a topic that I really did not want to write about because who wants to put a target on their back when they write a book like this? And yet I realized that violence that happens in these conflagrations really has a much slower and longer history. And oftentimes, when you tell that very personal human story, which is just the seed, you start to see that whole forest of violence and why that exists. And so I recognized that the one thing I could do was offer up my family story in that way, as a family that was caught in the middle of something that was state violence. And it it was the constant reminder then to remember that even though I had lost so much, there were people that were losing much more. And that in that act of story writing, it was also an act of giving, and it was an act of gifting back to the world something that might make sense of this wider, unimaginable, and sort of incomprehensible violence.
I don't really want to follow that because you're so articulate, Zara, but I feel like I could probably speak to some of the same points. And I think it's kind of uncanny that some of us have started out as fiction writers. I did too. It was always the genre that we were given growing up, the novels, the great American novelist or the great Russian novelist. It was something that was the genre for me, I thought. So I actually, tried to write short stories for many years. And then when I went to the army and joined the army at the ripe age of 18, I got into some trouble and I ended up leaving the army at the ripe old age of, no, I was 19. Um, so I was AWOL from the army, and there was something that I needed to do to process that. And I didn't realize it at the time. And it actually took me going back to college a couple of times, getting on Prozac. Actually, Kenny Cook is Zara and I's it's our mutual mentors here. And he helped me, and so did Melanie Bishop, who I think might be here too, start to articulate that story. And it sort of transferred between fiction and nonfiction, off and on for some years. And I remember Melanie saying one time in class, well, I find it personally easier to remember than to invent motive or to try to imagine why people do the things that they do. And I think I might fall into that camp too. Like it's easier, it's more painful though. And so I think for me, fiction, to Zara's point, was a way of kind of hiding or obfuscating things that I didn't really want to talk about. And so this book, my debut book, I started when I was 22 and I'm now 42. And I would say that all of those essays came out of that first kind of traumatic encounter with something that I needed to understand. And so writing for me has become something that I use as a tool. And this is what I tell my students when they're like, why do I have to take English 101? I'm like, it will help you understand your life. Even if you do not understand this now, it's a way for you to figure out the world that you live in your own words and make your own narrative, and nobody else gets to tell you what to say about yourself. I think that's really important. So even some of the essays in this book that happen chronologically earlier in the book were still written out of trying to understand, oh, maybe there actually was violence in my life, latent, subtle or emotional, working class violence, even before the thing with the army happened. And then what I pay attention to after that has really sort of become a lot too much of what I think about. I'm stop there.
Yeah, I'll go next. I came to creative nonfiction as a journalist, and somehow I got admitted into an MFA in creative writing program. Shout out to Georgia College in Milledgeville, Georgia. And I thought I was just going to go in there and I was thinking I was going to write narrative nonfiction and be kind of removed from the subject. But when I wrote that way, it did not resonate with my classmates or with anyone, And so I was like, oh, this is not really working. And so that's when I realized, okay, this needs to be creative. This needs to be personal. And that's when I started putting the personal in it. And I don't think you have to go to an MFA in creative writing program to write a book. But in my case, it really did help me grow because I was really coming from this journalist standpoint. And I have always wanted to write a book, and I wasn't quite sure when I came into the MFA program what I was going to write about. So I'm thinking about it. I had already been reporting on, I live in Atlanta, but I'm from coastal Georgia, Brunswick, Georgia to be exact. And I had already started reporting on environmental racism there and the toxic chemical sites there and how poisoning the air and water impact Gullah Geechee culture, where fishing and seafood in the ocean are a part of the way of life. So I had already been reporting on that. And in my second semester of grad school, content warning, I'm going to talk about fatal violence. In my second semester of grad school, one of my old classmates actually murdered Ahmaud Arbery in Brunswick, Georgia, and it became international news. And I had never been so close to such a horrific, violent act. And it felt like that could have been my little brother, right? He went to the same high school as me. And so that was something that I was drawn to write about, to report on. And so I think some of my colleagues here were talking about violence, and I feel like, you know, the environmental violence and the racist violence happening in coastal Georgia drew me to shine a light on it. But at the same time, really seeing the beauty in it at the same time, really learning a lot about what Gullah Geechee history and culture is, which I did not learn about in K through 12. And I feel like that was intentionally excluded. And so how did that violence shape my life? And how did not knowing about Gullah Geechee culture and the rich history of Black resistance in coastal Georgia, how did that impact my life? How did it shape me and my family? That started to, I don't know, I was like, oh, this is what the book's going to be about. Oh, it was hard. But it's here and I'm so excited. I'm so honored to be here. Y'all, this is amazing.
I'll go last. I actually have similar experience to Neesha and Lydia in that I started my memoir out in the third person, very standard kind of book about just like growing up as an Asian American person in the South. And my book is Little Seed. It's a mix of fiction and reporting and essay and nonfiction. And yeah, I got to a point, Lydia, I think it's interesting that you found yourself going from fiction to nonfiction. For me, I was writing about my childhood in, standard memoir, first person, and just hit a wall. And I was like, I can't talk about a lot of this stuff and I can't get it out. And so, yeah, Neesha, also like you, deciding that you needed to go in a more creative direction. For me, I actually need to go into the third person and into fiction. And so I wound up actually transforming half of my manuscript into like a fictionalized account, like a fable of my childhood. And I found that that was a much easier way to access the trauma and the difficulties and just like the kind of imagination of being like a child. So yeah, I don't know, that's how my book came about. And my book also features like what is basically a field guide to ferns, and that part is very researched and reported and sometimes traverses personal writing, but it's very much oftentimes like very sort of nature writing, botanic writing. And I don't know, I think artistic sensibility has to do with it. Like I like to read work that is just like all the crap bashed together. And so I always just wanted to write a book like that. And then I did.
Lovely. I'm gonna mash two questions together, one that I had for you all and then one that an audience member had as well that's really lovely. And you kind of touched on it a little bit, some of you in your responses. This idea of like the genre of creative nonfiction, the amount of authenticity and vulnerability that it requires is remarkably confrontational, I feel, as both a writer and a reader. And so I'm curious, especially hearing you all say like coming from fiction or from a journalistic background and then having to like air your dirty laundry, to use your words, Neesha, that you used in your essay. How do you find the courage to do that? And what is the reason, like, why creative nonfiction, right? Why not have just stuck with the other forms or the other genres of writing? And then want to tie that also into like when you're writing about people in your life, and it's like a delicate situation, how do you balance out that care with telling the truth, knowing that that person might also read your writing, read your book? So basically, all the difficulties or the moral aspects of writing creative nonfiction. How do you do it, and why do you do it?
You know, this is something that I've been thinking about a lot of late because with my book, I've had a couple family members who have been like, "Oh, yay, thank you so much," but I've had a few who have been going around saying that I'm very untruthful, and someone who even said that they were ashamed of me and all sorts of things, right? So very intense stuff. And so I've been thinking about this a lot, like, you know, why would I write it? And part of it for me was a lot of it is with my little brother who never died in prison and never had a voice, you know? And to be able to try and put that on the page and have that meant everything for me. And it was worth the people who have been very unhappy with me. And for me, it was like, you know what? Like I choose him in this over the negative things. And so when I wrote, it was very similar to you, Lydia, like trying to like figure myself out on the page, because a lot of it is me figuring myself out on the page. That I didn't know what to think, or even how I believed, you know. And so a lot of that was a journey, like a self-exploration kind of a thing. And so I found that I couldn't do that through fiction. But here's the thing, though, too, is like now that I've written this book, I feel like, because now I'm back to writing fiction, and now that I've written this book, I feel like I can do that more. But I needed to write this first, because nothing else was going to come out until I did it.
Yeah.
I wanted to build on what David said about like the need for self-exploration. I felt that a lot with my book, and I actually came out of it with maybe the opinion that, and David, I wonder if you would agree with this and if the other writers on this chat agree with this, but I actually think that there's some kind of obligation with writing memoir and like that kind of self-exploration, that part of the art is also in the publication and with dealing with what happens with your life when people know at least like what your version of the truth looks like. And so for me, I think it felt very important to see publishing the book and writing the book as a boundary of like kind of saying like, this is who I am and this is who I wish to be. And the boundary, being set by it being out there. And, you don't get to go back once you say like, this is, these are my values and this is who I am.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's even kind of a responsibility in it once you've thrown that out there, because it's like you speak for yourself, and then there's so many people who are like, yeah, I feel the same way. And yeah, so as far as what you're saying, yeah, absolutely. I absolutely feel that.
Just a quick addition to that. I do remember when I was younger and I was, I would go to books for comfort or to understand certain things better than I could before. And I feel like memoir, well, fiction too, but like memoir in my older, it's funny to say that, I'm 42, has become more and more important in terms like as a tool. And I have really appreciated being able to read really vulnerable things from people, that this is stuff we don't talk about in day-to-day conversation. It's really hard to broach this topic with new people, with strangers. So it builds bridges. I think it builds alliances. It builds community, and saying, you know what, here is a different perspective than maybe is the mainstream perspective, and it coming from a personal place, I think makes it all the stronger. I also want to say that there are some escape hatches that I found to be very useful having fiction training. Like using the third person in some essays or using the second person in some essays to give, like I've done that many times, to give myself latitude. And some of my MFA folks at one point were like, can you stop writing in the second person? Because we're kind of tired of you pushing the second person perspective on us, on me. I wouldn't think like that. So I do think that, whatever it kind of takes to get it out. And then, yeah, I had a student ask me this yesterday, and she was like, is it really hard to get it, to put yourself out there in the world, and you're afraid you're going to make people mad? And I'm super afraid, and that's sort of part of the discipline, is disciplining yourself to be strong enough to sort of, whatever the cliche, build a thick skin, so that when things come back at you, that it's going to be okay. And I do think that it's surprising how many people are kind, like shockingly kind, when you share work like this with them in a meaningful way. And that trumps, I think, any of the hate mail. which I've actually gotten a couple pieces for, or like your grandma being mad at you, of course it hurts, but I feel like what David was saying, like something matters more maybe. And maybe it's also a way to open discussion with people that maybe it's useful to have these discussions with about perspective.
If not me, who? I'm a very private person, and I really can't believe that, so much of my personal life is now out here for the world. And it was kind of like a chance opportunity that I met a book editor who was interested in my thesis and then published it. And it all happened. It took about 3 to 4 years to write the book, but then the publishing of it happened sooner than I thought it would. And I had so many moments where I was just, well, even still now, I just had my book launch last week. It's just so nerve-wracking. But then I remember, okay, like how many other Black, queer, disabled people from coastal Georgia have published a memoir? Not many. And so that's a gap. I want people who come after me who are like me to know that there have been people like me, like them, And so it's just, and also reading other people's memoirs, it kind of gives you that courage, like I can be brave too. So I really do think I wrote this for Black, queer, and trans folks, but people from all walks of life have been able to relate to so much of the stuff, the complicated family relationships, just different things like that. That's just a part of the human experience. And so it's really exciting that people who I don't share identities with can see themselves in this book as well. So, yeah.
Everybody has said pretty much everything I wanted to say. So I'll take the second part of the question to think about the dignity of those that you write about and how do you take care of those that you write about. For me, almost everybody that is in that book and who was witness to that part of our lives is gone, which means that as I write, I know that their stories are this gift that an inheritance that I think I can give to the world. And yet it is maybe there are some parts of it that are not mine to give. And recognizing that as I wrote was a huge sort of learning curve for me in also looking at them as my relatives, as people who are full humans and not just material for a manuscript. But I think in the bigger picture too, when we think of these sort of multiple violences and especially state sanctioned or massacre level violences, people are so easily reduced to data points and to little sets of numbers out there. And a memoir often is one of the few ways that allows you to reinstall and restore that fullness of humanity and that fullness of dignity to people. And so I turned that around for myself and said, well, what if I could do this not only for my father, but I could also do it for the man who was in the mob, who was the person that wanted to kill us? How about if I did this for the woman who has been through sexual violence, but not with the burden that the world puts on the victim of sexual violence? And so how do I then restore that beauty and fullness to her life before that moment? And so once I made that my perspective and that lens, I think it made it a lot easier for me to know what my goalpost was.
Lovely. Thank you all so much. We're closing in on our time, but I would love to extend for a couple more minutes to see if we can squeeze in like one or two more audience questions. So maybe like a little bit of like a lightning round. Let's think of it like that. So the next question I'd like to pose for you all that someone asked is, what was the querying process like for you? I'm going to extend that to like querying agents or even reaching out and submitting to presses directly and things of that sort. And how did you know when your manuscript was ready to be sent out? Which is a great question. If a couple of you want to take it, and then we'll go to the next one.
I don't want to be
sorry.
the first
No,
one.
go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead, please. I don't want to be the first one anymore.
Well, just that I went through with the standard advice of look at the books on your bookshelf and pick the people that already represent voices that you enjoy. They don't have to represent the exact kind of book you're writing, but if they're looking at voices that really speak to you, then this is a person you can have a long career of conversation with. And that's what you want. You're not looking for them to just agent and represent your first book. You're looking for them to represent you as a writer. And so I really just did that. I literally looked at my bookshelf and I was very audacious because I had half an essay and three-quarters of a poem when I first wrote to this agent. And she wrote back very sweetly and said, this is all lovely and you sound great, but no, thank you. But what I did then was I let that fuel me to finish the manuscript. And I sent it back to her 2.5 years later. And I said, I actually have a full draft for you. And I had some confidence built by then because I had submitted it to contests and it had been picked as finalist in a few places. So I knew that I was working with something strong enough by that point. But once we got into that conversation, I had to keep reminding myself that as much as making a debut and kind of going out there is a very vulnerable thing to do, and it's so scary, end of the day, the agents are there to help you and work with you, and they're there to support your career. And your career working helps them. So it is an equal position. And I think reminding myself of that gave me a lot more confidence to sort of deal with those conversations.
No, absolutely. It was funny when you started talking. I pointed to you where you're at on my screen. I do that all the time. But no, but yeah, I think querying is the first few times that I queried the memoir, I sent it out just sporadically. And I know even then I knew you weren't really supposed to do that, but I did, because it is a time-consuming process. It really is. But I wasn't getting anywhere with it. And as far as when I knew that it was done, it wasn't after until, my little brother died and I reworked the book. I had a couple good friends look at it. But when I started querying and I wasn't really paying attention, I just kind of like, went to whoever. But one thing that my book deals with a lot, not as much as in the parts that I read, but like, so my mother's indigenous and black and my dad is white. And so it's like we're very, very mixed. And so I had read this article, Mariah Stowell, here at Poets and Writers, where she was talking about particularly Black women in the agents in the industry, but just people of color in general. And I thought, oh, well, I think I'll submit to agents who would appreciate that. And so I did. And then as soon as I did that, I then had two agents who were interested. One being Mariah, who's my agent now. And so that makes a huge difference, I think, when you're querying is, looking at, who will want to read your work, I think. A lot of ways, yeah.
Okay, lovely. Nobody else has any burning responses to that. We'll end on the last one. Oh, Lydia, go for it.
I'll just be super quick because I don't have an agent and I queried some and then I ended up submitting to a small press, to University of Georgia Press. They had an open call. And I was so happy that there was that opportunity, just to be able to kind of say, okay, I'm going to try, without having to go through additional steps. So it was a slightly different process, but also really valuable just in terms of the mentorship with the editors at the press, so it was still nice to have that kind of back and forth dialogue that I think that we look to when we're like, I want to have an agent so that you have, curatorial help with your work.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a very important perspective as well. All right, the last question I'm going to squeeze in here. From the audience, did you each build a platform before publication? I'm going to interpret that as like a social media platform or some sort of online presence, or building out some type of network before your book was released. And did it help you in the publication process?
I can speak to this, and it also sort of dovetails with the agent question. I've been a journalist for the last decade, and I will say that I think I kind of sidled my way into the agent process. I've published a lot. I published on Ferns, and I had agents reach out to me to ask me whether I had book projects. And so I think that's a really good way to go, is if you can work your way up, publishing small pieces to bigger pieces, you'll get attention. And I think it also has helped me through the publication process, because I'm with a small press, and I think in general, like the more that you're able to know how to pitch, know how to write these articles, like know how to sorry, I'm in the baby's room and the baby's in the background. Yeah, I think that an alternate route, in like Lydia has talked about, just like pitching your own book to small presses, but sort of building out like content around what you want to write, is a great way to do things. I'm sure Neesha also has approached it in this way.
Yeah, I feel like I have, all the social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Like I said, like I feel like I'm naturally a private person, but I understand like you have to play the game. Sometimes I'm like, I don't want to be on social media this much, but and I feel like something as small as like I have my email address in my Twitter bio, and so many people have found me that way. Or like people have found me through my website and have offered, been like, oh, I want you to write for me, or, just so it definitely helps. Like, and you're just gonna have to get over you're gonna have to take breaks if you're like me. But my book just came out on September 24th, so I've been very, very online. And it is important in this day and age. I wish it wasn't. I wish you could just be a hermit and be good, but it definitely is helpful. I don't have like the hugest number of followers, but I've still seen it make an impact, people being able to find me on social media.
Lovely. Anyone want to add any last words? Yeah, David, go
I was
for
gonna
it.
say I'm terrible with social media. Like, no lie, I think I just made my Instagram profile like public maybe like a few days ago. Like I'm not and I think I have like 200 followers. I bet I do need to be better at that. Like I am gonna say like, yeah. Like and I published a few things before the memoir. But as far as social media, Neesha, I'm gonna take your advice there. I'm gonna do better. Like I said, like I just made it public because surprisingly enough, for writing a memoir, like I'm not like an out there kind of guy with social media and such. But
All right. We're all going to brush up on our social media profiles, I'm sure, after this, and, make it public, do all the things. Thank you all so much. It's been such a joy sharing space with all five of you this evening, and listening to you read and respond so graciously to all the questions. On behalf of poets and writers, I want to extend our gratitude to Neesha, Lydia, Zara, Wei, and David for joining us over Zoom and for adding your stunning stories to the world with the publication of your debuts. We will drop once more in the group chat the link to our bookshop page, including all five titles and the ability to oh so easily purchase them, as well as the link to the online feature where you can listen to and read excerpts from their books, and a link to subscribe to our magazine, which includes thoughtfully curated content for a wide range of writers and readers, as well as the personal essays of these lovely five authors. I want to also give a round of applause for our active Zoom audience today, and thank you all so much for spending time with us. Tonight's event has been recorded, so this will be up online on YouTube and our website in the coming days. So if any friends missed out on it, share it widely with them. And this concludes the celebration of our 2024 new nonfiction authors. Thank you for joining us, and I'm wishing everyone good health as we head into the colder seasons and much peace. So thank you all so much. We'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.